Down here in the trenches of the Computer Shopper Scanning Project, there are a few day-to-day issues that have come up while making the plans for how the pipeline will work. And while I've discussed it already pretty much at length, I feel like there's just one more lesson, one more set of credos that have to be discussed in this fanciful, epic, hopefully never to be done again, scanning endeavor. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It, a podcast about technology, history, and getting myself out of debt. Thanks to Daniel Boyd, Jeff Atwood, and the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. So, a quick set of reminders why this project is a nightmare. Computer shoppers are huge, anywhere between a few hundred to south of 1,000 pages per issue, during the peak going into massive, massive tomes that came every month, which means there's hundreds of issues going back 20, 30 years, and they weren't always printed with the most care. They had newsprint paper that would rival flyers for its disposability. And then they would move into extremely difficult, small gutter, 2-page spreads that made them impossible for a camera scanner to do anything. It was obvious this had to be a series of disassembled pages turned into meat for a sheet-fed scanner and then gone through for quality assurance, verification, and then merely producing incredibly gargantuan PDF files for people who just wanted to look at an old magazine. If you've done something a few times, it's very special, ceremonial even. You walk through the process, excitedly share it with your friends. You find unique things as you go along, maybe only one or two, but you remember them. You savor them, you enjoy them. But when you start working in industrial levels of ingestion, of digitization, of processing, a lot of that goes out the window. You occasionally take aside a souvenir, mental or otherwise, about something you ran into that's really special. But there's a lot of that. There's a lot of everything. And as part of the process, it was incredibly important to prove that we could take a physical copy of Computer Shopper and turn it into something readable and enjoyable and reminiscent of the original on the Internet Archive. This was, like everything else, a fractally hard problem. But at the moment that I speak, February 1986 has made it. It has made it to the end. It exists both as something in collectors' collections and as a pile of sheets that I've stacked up and put away, and as a PDF and readable online experience. This is a triumph. But one of the other things it's done for me is reveal how many little decisions had to be made. I was committed to the highest resolution possible, and the sheet-fed scanner that I use tops out at 600 dpi. Because it's dragging it across an element, that element can do 600 dpi really well. It's not a relative 600 dpi that you might get with a camera scanner, where you're kind of estimating. You are getting a sharp, in-focus, complete image of a large page. And it is large. These are large format magazines. Having it be so large means, well, two things. First of all, the family of scanners that can even do this job in one piece and do it sheet-fed are very small and very expensive. It also means that there's so much that can go wrong while you're feeding incredibly thin pieces of paper through it. I learned very quickly that the rollers that are inside of this scanner have to be removed. There's one roller at the top, which is meant to separate pages, and because of the poor printing, it would actually smudge the ink. So I removed it, meaning I couldn't just put a stack of paper in anymore. It was going to be one at a time. Lesson learned. Doing that, I found that sometimes it would make the images go very askew, so I had to put them in again and again until it got it right. Another lesson learned. I then also had to figure out if anything had gone wrong with the edges. Had they been cut wrong or cut roughly? Because anything, any minuscule amount, would cause it all to fall apart and get stuck. Not every lesson cost me a page, but some did. And then, even with that successful scan, I thought the job was done. But it had just begun. Because there were things to take into account as to what the actual scanner was doing on a circuitry level in scanning the image. The software I use, ViewScan, has a lot of different options for working with and modifying images, but also has settings to do absolutely nothing, to leave it all to the scanner. And after discussing with Gaming Alexandria the best way to do this, we decided zero processing. It's not pretty. It's got all sorts of off-kilter colors, because no software at that moment is trying to make decisions for the next generations. It's simply showing what it sees, and it's incumbent on somebody doing the post-processing to figure out what needs to be done to return it to some image that's considered normal. After a few run-throughs of that experience, we then had a problem of having a 70 gigabyte zip file, which was more than it was easy to work with for Gaming Alexandria. That meant that we had to start discussing hard drives being mailed, which is what's going to happen in the future. A hard drive containing packs of paper that have been scanned into large archives will have to be mailed for post-processing. And then, having figured out how to scan it without causing any damage, how to package it all up, how to not add additional modifications or compression or processing to it, and then turning it into zip files to be transferred, we had a little bit more to work out. You see, when you think about an old scan of a magazine, there's a problem. You're going from a piece of paper with ink on it to a digital image, and that digital image may be vaguely harder to read because the way that the light came off the scanner might be different than how your eye experienced any of it. What I mean by all this is that Gaming Alexandria, experienced as they are with hundreds and actually thousands of individual magazines that they've done over the years, knows that what you usually get in a digital form of one of these doesn't quite look like the original. They have to sharpen the colors. They have to get rid of banding and weird imperfections. They have to de-skew, even to the point of fixing skewing and errors in the original printing. And then there's the argument of contrast. You can make a magazine that is perfect in terms of contrast, where every word leaps from the page and all of the pictures are sharp and intense and in focus. And if you were to put it side by side with what was originally there, they seem more like cousins, maybe brothers, instead of the exact same page. It's a decision being made by a current generation of processors preparing things to be viewed by others. Now, I've gone really far into all of this. People have donated thousands of dollars to buy these issues, thousands of dollars on this scanner. So I thought it would be good to spend a little more time and put in a few more options. Many of the issues of Computer Shopper that will be going up will probably have 2 different PDFs for each issue. One will be called Readable, and the other one will be called Aesthetic. Readable will look really good at lower resolutions, lower DPI screens, while Aesthetic will look like the original page in a way that feels authentic to a person who went through it, like myself. That means bleed through. That means fuzzy, weird ink. It means colors not popping out, but fading into each other, representing how weird and odd this whole printing process was, and people trying to jam everything into every ad to save money. I'm trying to give people options. A part of me really bristles if we see a meme or a passed-along email showing these old ads that are going to become available, and it's this terrible, high-contrast, fax-like experience compared to the rich feeling of this missive from another place that came on cheap paper. I want that second experience to be dominant for the purposes of sharing how it was. But I also want to respect people doing actual research and not wanting to have to squint through different colors. I'm trying to think of these possible people, these different theoretical audiences that are going to experience all of this. Because it's just really begun. The first issue has gone through the pipeline. I don't know the total time per issue this is going to take. I know it's going to be quite some time. Every little decision made by myself, by Gaming Alexandria, by the post-processing that happens at the Internet Archive, weighs down in the expanse of time. And my hope is that doing it the way we are doing it, never modifying original raw scans, providing alternative, easier-to-read versions and easier-to-remember versions, will give the world, historians, researchers, readers, rubberneckers, writers, and thinkers, just everything they could ever want to know about this unique and beautiful work that thrived for so many years. That's what I want to do here. And like my documentaries, like a lot of my other projects, I can already predict for you, I'm going to burn out on this. I'm going to finish it, and I'm never going to want to do it again. But when I sit down at the end of this task, I do feel, at the very least, that I'm going to lie back with a smile, looking at the mountain that myself and all of these generous donators and volunteers brought into being. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It. Thanks to James Bekoyanu, Mark Pilgrim, Ernie Hershey, Michael Rubin, Craig Talbert, Dileep Reddy, Sean Kelly, Trixie the Cat, Martin, Symbionts, and Anonymous, along with the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. I feel like my voice sometimes gets a little more scratchy these days, and I suspect it's part of the ramping up of interacting with individuals, of getting small colds and passing sicknesses as I reacquaint myself with the world. I'm sure I'll sound even better as time goes on.